Hey everybody, what up? It's a hot day out here.
All right, so I just learned about his channel the other day, and I saw this video, watched it through once, love this video, and so we're gonna go through and we're gonna kind of do like a running commentary as we go. Spoiler alert: he's questioning whether 100% code coverage on in terms of unit tests is worth the investment. My opinion is absolutely not. But we're gonna go ahead and watch, and I'll do some running commentary.
In DC area, it's like a swamp, 100 degrees almost. Not yet, but it's close. Anyway, in this video, I want to talk about unit testing, right? As a software developer, it seems like we spend the majority of our time writing unit tests. That's like one of the things that I feel like for me, it's probably the biggest pain of the actual code. Like writing new features and all that's pretty easy to do, but then like trying to unit test edge cases can be pretty complicated when you're dealing with like dependency injections and stuff like that.
Finding edge cases for a developer is extremely difficult. For the most part, if a developer writes a feature and then writes tests, or writes the test first and then writes the feature to match, in the case of TDD, 99% of the time they're going to miss edge cases because a human just cannot predict every single permutation of possible outcomes with the code, and cannot predict how it's going to interact with other complex systems. So basically, if you sit down and you try to write all of your edge cases for unit tests, one of two things is going to happen. The first is that you're just going to miss edge cases, which is usually what happens, or you're going to spend so much time writing unit tests that it is just not worth the effort compared to setting up good monitoring and then reactively writing bug fixes with tests to constrain them if you feel like that's necessary. And most of the time it's just not necessary.
That. So I guess in this video, I just want to pose the question, like, do we think that unit testing is really bringing a huge value? I mean, obviously it does bring a value. I would say probably a pretty big value, but like, some people go by like test-driven development, where like literally every line of code has to have a test for it. That's called 100% code completion or 100% code coverage. And I've been on teams. There was an insurance company I worked for, an $80 billion insurance company or somewhere around that. And we were working for 3 years on a sales application. And it was all JavaScript based, using Knockout, and had like 1 million components. We were writing all the tests in Jest, and I think back, Jasmine and a bunch of other things. But we had it 100% code coverage. Like it was on the back end too, so it was C#.NET on the back end, and that also had to have 100% code coverage. So anytime you would go to make like basically one line change or add like the tiniest little enhancement to the code, you'd end up having to rewrite like 15, 20 tests or something like that. So it's like, oh, it took you a long time to do that one little tiny thing, but it's like the majority of your time was actually spent writing the unit test. So that said, we go to release that thing, and this is after 3 years, and it's got half the performance of the application we were trying to replace it with. So clearly, like, the VPs and all that were pissed off.
This is a great example. So most people that I've run into believe that quality comes from code coverage. They prioritize that over other things. So some examples of things that could be prioritized instead is building a real quick version of the dashboard or whatever they're trying to build in the technology stack that you have, and then seeing how the performance is in a very simple, straightforward implementation. We would call that a spike, but you would basically spike this tech stack doing a simple thing, see how the performance is, no tests at all, no code coverage, and basically say to yourself, is this screamingly fast? Is this way better than what we already have, like our more complex version? Or is it worse? Because if you do something like that and the performance is worse and you haven't built anything yet, my God, you have saved your organization. I don't know how many people on his team, let's say 5, 15 people years worth of development time can be saved with like a 2-sprint spike on a new tech stack. And a lot of people don't actually do this. It would surprise you how many people specify the stack during the like the bidding or the estimation stage, and then they just like set performance indicators like okay, we're using this stack with 100% code coverage. We're going to have 5 developers and we're going to burn for 2 years and it's going to be awesome. And then they just go for it. And I'll admit that, you know, I've worked on agencies where I have contributed to this mindset, and it is very common. And it wasn't until I switched up employers to an employer who just has a lot of experience building awesome products really quickly. And it like completely twisted my brain, and I had to throw out all of my preconceived notions about testing, about how bidding should work, about how much experimentation should be done beforehand. And I really had to like deprogram my like professional self to learn these methods, and it's completely changed the way I think about this stuff.
And then in addition to that, like when I say half the performance, like I mean it did half the friggin' sales. So it was slower and it did half the sales of like what it was trying to replace. And there was over 30,000 bugs on that project. So I think it's normal.
The 30,000 bug thing is amazing. So, you know, I would love to hear more from Chris, but I'm assuming what happened is they put a bunch of developers on this project. They had their 100% code coverage. They had their stack. They built. They did feature after feature after feature after feature, getting ready to do this big release. And then they got to the big release. And then right before launch, they realized that there were all of these bugs. And if this is what happened, my suspicion is that there was no actual QA team going through the features as they were building and making bug tickets, because someone somewhere said, we have 100% code coverage, it's going to work. And they would just be wrong. There's no, in my experience, there's no correlation between 100% code coverage and quality. I would take 20% code coverage and a handful of professional QA folks over 100% code coverage any day of the week. Like I wouldn't even think twice about it.
Normal to have a lot of bugs, but in that particular case, that's where I was like, well, holy shit, like what was the point of doing all this 100% code completion or code coverage to have this result, you know? So you can write bad unit tests, and that's the big thing. So it's like, I think that there should be like probably a threshold of like 75-80% is probably reasonable. And then anything over that, I mean, you should have QA, quality assurance people testing the application in the dev and staging environments and all that.
So it's interesting when most people say 75% code coverage, not every language, but a lot of languages, when you use their code coverage calculating tools, what it does is if you've got a project with 100 files, but you only have one file under test and you hit all the lines in that file, it will report 100% code coverage when the truth is that it's actually 1% code coverage. So a lot of times you have to write like a fake test. They'll import every file in the project so that every file is hit by code paths, and then that will give you an actual number. So I'm always extremely skeptical when people say that they have 100% code coverage, because in a lot of languages, unless they're doing this extra step to ensure that every single file is being accounted for, they can be a fraction of that. Like I've been on projects that say they have 100% code coverage, and you go and you look under the hood and they've got like 30%.
And then you should also write, I think, end-to-end integration tests. So I've always been a proponent of like these end-to-end integration tests using things like, it used to be like Selenium, and then now we're using like Cypress and Puppeteer and all that. And I got courses on that, by the way, if you want, on CodeHawk. But that's a good tool, I think, to like scrape and automate, because then you don't have to deal with like having to mimic what JavaScript is doing behind the scenes. You could just do it.
So end-to-end tests, I don't use a lot of them, but I think that they're fantastic. I believe it was React Router had a website where you could sign up for like premium support or something like that. And they had on that entire website a single end-to-end test. And all that test was creating an account and making a payment with a fake credit card. And that's all it was. And that is a perfect example of a single end-to-end test that can supersede almost all of your business logic unit tests. Because if a person can't create an account, pay, and then get a confirmation email, then what's even the point, right? So essentially you could build that entire web app, write that single end-to-end test, and then as far as I'm concerned, you're like 80% of the way there. There are some other things you should have coverage on, you'll figure out as you go. And if you get bugs coming in from like a QA team or something like that, then you can put some code coverage on that. But honestly, there's a lot of projects that will do 100% unit tests, and then they won't even do a basic QA pass or have like a very basic critical end-to-end test, and that's a huge mistake.
Through the browser. So anyway, that said though, I think the end-to-end integration tests actually make much more sense because you're actually testing the true product. You know, you're testing, okay, did I click on this button? Did it do what I expected it to do and all this? Whereas like the unit test is like you click.
So real quick, the way I look at end-to-end tests is they're kind of like automated QA personnel, but really stupid and can only do one thing. So a QA, if you have like a basic QA, or if you have a good QA professional who's checking your app before release, they can go through and make a payment with a fake credit card. And if anything doesn't look right, they can be like, oh, I don't think this is quite right. Let's write a ticket about it. But you can write an end-to-end test that goes through and makes that payment, but it will not care if like a button is, missing an image or something's placed in the wrong area or there's some kind of jank when the screen is making transitions. Like it will not catch any of those things at all. So you can absolutely replace end-to-end tests with human QA, and it will blow your mind like how effective 15 human minutes of QA can be before release. Let's just blast through the onboarding. Let's make sure that account is created. Let's get in and sign up with a fake credit card. And then let's, delete our account, right? Most people can do that in less than 15 minutes if they know the product. And you will catch things that have nothing to do with that flow along the way. It casts a very wide net, and it's extremely cheap to have someone do that. And you can spend a lot of time investing in unit tests and end-to-end tests to do the same thing. And they won't, and those tests will not be able to like understand the product. They'll just be able to do a very, very specific thing.
On the button, and I've just mocked all this other stuff, and then the button does this, or it calls this, and did that function get called and all that. It's like, to me, it's more important that the function got called, it returned the right shit, and it worked, So the problem though with these end-to-end integration tests, especially like with Puppeteer, Cypress, Selenium, any of those things that you're going to be using, is that they're slow as hell. So it really slows down your build times, and that's where I think that like there should probably be some sort of separation where you don't make the code build require a passing end-to-end integration test. In my opinion, it would probably be better to just have that run on a separate process, generate a report, and then come back to you before it fails. Now, if you're releasing...
This is a great use case for Slack channels. You can have it so that, you put up a PR, it runs all the unit tests. If the unit tests are green, then require someone else to review it, and then it can merge. Whereas your integration tests, your end-to-end tests, can essentially say when a build gets pushed to main, like when it actually succeeds and goes to main, then run the integration tests. And if they succeed, do nothing. And if they fail, submit a report to like a Slack channel, and then all the developers will get notified of it. And so will QA, and so will product managers, and it'll be surfaced. And it doesn't have to block things from merging.
Releasing code to prod like every day, then I think you just have to rely on the fact that these builds are going to take a long time. You have to check all your balances there. But if you're not releasing every single day, which hopefully, these days with this iterative development we are, if you're truly agile, I think it's okay to release every day. But if you're sort of agile waterfall, like releasing every day or even every week is a effing nightmare.
So I actually think that releasing every day is really bad unless you are a back-end team. The problem I have with releasing every day, every hour, or even every week with front-end applications is that it's actually a huge pain in the ass for the customer. And I can give you an example of that. There's this tool I use at work called Loom, which is essentially you can make a video recording and you can send it to somebody. And that app, I swear, updates every 6 hours. And every time it updates, it steals focus from my mouse and my keyboard for 10 seconds. So I have no idea what's going on. It throws an application in my dock and then it disappears. And then you get this thing popping up in Mission Control that's like mouse hover overlay. And then sometimes it disappears. And it's just a huge pain in the ass to have this happen 4 times a day, every day. It makes me want to uninstall the app. So and also it's very difficult in developers. You end up having to rely on tons of automated testing, which I think is not like a good way to constrain quality. So you're essentially annoying your customers. You are decreasing your quality. You're stressing out your developers, and you're gaining, and you're losing the ability to say like, hey, everybody, we did this amazing release. Like, look at all these cool things we put in it, because you're just trickling them out every day. And a 2-week release cycle is extremely fast. If you can bundle up a handful of great releases every 2 weeks, customers will notice, and they will feel like you're screamingly fast at handling building new and better software. So this whole like 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week release cycle, I just think is absolutely ridiculous. Unless you have a very specific business reason why you need this, I just don't think that it's worth all the downsides.
My point being is, like, I think end-to-end integration tests make much more sense than actual unit testing. I do think unit testing should be necessary, but 100% code coverage is probably unnecessary, and I think it slows down development. So yeah, and then the biggest downside to the end-to-end integration test is the fact that it makes the build really slow. So if you have hundreds or thousands of tests, it could take like 25 minutes for a build to pass, and that's a long time to wait to find out your code didn't build properly and didn't get checked in, and by then you're on another task, and you have to go back and check out your branch again, figure out what the hell went wrong, rewrite the test or whatever. But yeah, all that said, I've seen them both. I've seen test-driven development where you write a test before you even write in logic and all that. This is all just I think personal opinion, my own and other people's as well. But yeah, I don't know. What do you all think? I mean, do we need these tests?
All right, so thank you so much for listening. I've been thinking about this a lot, posting a lot about it on Twitter and saying things like no unit tests, which is crazy. You need some kind of unit test for certain things, right? If you've got a pure function, probably a good place to have a unit test. I think that human QA is a lost art, and if you can find a couple great QA professionals to like put together a team and train people how to do great QA, it will do way more for you than 100% code coverage any day. And also drop the hourly, daily, weekly releases. Nobody cares. You're just pissing people off unless you have like a very specific reason to do it. Just do, every 2 weeks, and like bundle up a nice set of features, a nice set of bug fixes. And by all means, if you have something that needs to be hot fixed, release it before then. Cut a patch release. Your customers will be happy that you did it, and they'll be happy that you did it for a reason. And so that's what I got. I really appreciate your time. And thank you very much.